The best ex-husband. After getting drunk, I lunged at him and tried to kiss him forcefully. He pushed me away, saying, "No, we are already divorced." In a bustling bar in the city center, and Huey's wine-red short hair didn't shine as brightly amid the colorful lights and wines. Instead, her slender legs attracted the frequent attention of onlookers. When Hui descended from the dance platform, her head was even more dizzy. After cursing loudly, she collapsed onto the table and fell into a deep sleep, completely unresponsive to any attempts to wake her. Accompanying Hui was another young woman, her new colleague Jian Jiao. Jian Jiao didn't expect Hui to have such a poor tolerance for alcohol. Helplessly furrowing her brows, she decided to call Hui's family to pick her up. Surprisingly, when checking Hui's family contacts in the phone book, Jian Jiao was astonished to find that Hui was already married. Without hesitation, she dialed the contact labeled husband. When Qing'an received the call, he was still working overtime at the office. Upon hearing that Hui was drunk, he immediately set aside his work and drove over. He knew Hui's alcohol tolerance very well. It was like a bird drinking water. When she got drunk, she would stay quiet for a while, and then the drunken madness would begin. The summer night was still somewhat hot. Qing'an opened a window, and the breeze that came in tousled his long hair. After being divorced for so long, his hair had grown considerably, so he decided to try out a new hairstyle. The distance from the bar to the company wasn't long, but due to the bustling road conditions, driving wasn't easy. When Qing'an arrived at the bar, he immediately spotted the unconscious Hui in the noisy environment. In that chaotic atmosphere, with Hui completely unaware, a surge of anger welled up in Qing'an's heart. He strode over, rudely grabbing Hui's arm. "Hui, wake up." Hui looked at the newcomer impatiently, but upon seeing that it was Qing'an, she became somewhat more alert. "What are you doing? Mind your own business." Hui raised her arm, preparing to continue sleeping. Jian Jiao looked at the man Hui called her husband. He was indeed handsome, wearing black pants paired with a deep purple shirt. The dark patterns on the shirt mirrored the enigmatic allure of the man himself. Seeing someone come to pick up Hui, Jian Jiao took her leave. Qing'an nodded in acknowledgement and watched as Jian Jiao and her friend left the bar. Qing'an turned back to pull Hui. "It's not like I want to interfere, but a woman like you getting this drunk in a bar, do you have any sense of safety?" His voice involuntarily raised a few decibels. Hui stood up, not backing down. "It's none of your business, we're already divorced." She staggered towards the door, leaving her backpack on the platform. Qing'an grabbed the strap of the backpack and caught up with Hui. "It's not like I want to care about you, but why haven't you changed the contact name on your phone? Still calling me husband?" "What husband? I don't have a husband." Hui's defensive voice grew louder, but her steps became increasingly unsteady. Leaning against Qing'an, she continued, "Just leave me alone. Stubborn woman, hurry up and go back. Change it back quickly. I don't want to clean up your mess." Qing'an held her firmly, not gently, and stuffed her into the car before fastening her seatbelt. 2. Hui gripped the seatbelt, her head feeling dizzy and heavy. Suddenly, she looked up at Qing'an and said, "Why did you tie me up? I warn you, my husband is really good at fighting." Qing'an suppressed a smile and said, "Yeah, really good." Inwardly, he felt somewhat helpless, knowing that Hui was probably gearing up for a drunken tantrum. True to form, the next moment, Hui was about to open the window and stick her head out. "Get in, it's too dangerous," Qing'an warned. Hui, of course, didn't listen. Helpless, Qing'an took the tie from the back seat and used it to bind Hui's hands. With his left hand on the wheel, he used his right hand to keep Hui in check. "Hey, what are you touching me for?" Hui looked at the large hand on her leg and grumbled unhappily. Qing'an ignored her, thinking resentfully, "She's wearing such a short skirt." Although Hui had a fiery personality, she had always dressed modestly and tastefully. She never wore anything provocative or revealing. But now, not only was she dressed differently, but she also learned to drink at bars. With these thoughts, He Ching-en shook his head and self-mockingly laughed. It's none of my business. Since their previous home was too far from the bar, He Ching-en had to bring her to his own downtown bachelor apartment, the place he had been living in since his divorce from Eun-hui. The apartment was small, just one bedroom and one living room, but it was conveniently close to his workplace. On the way, Eun-hui kept muttering to herself, 54678, I've noted down your license plate number. Just wait for the police uncle to come and arrest you. What goes around comes around. He Ching-en, where are you? Why aren't you coming to save me? Her voice was so loud that He Ching-en couldn't find peace by his ear, damn it, and there were red lights all along the way. Finally reaching the apartment, He Ching-en didn't even take off the tie from Eun-hui's hands. Instead, he lifted her along with it. The moment He Ching-en lifted Eun-hui, she changed her tone. Woo woo woo, you finally came to rescue me. I knew you would beat the kidnapper black and blue. As He Ching-en carried her into the elevator, he teased her, who am I? Eun-hui answered confidently, He Ching-en. He Ching-en lowered his head to look at her. Her eyes were still as bright and untainted as before. Eun-hui's most attractive feature was her eyes, her thick and upward curled eyelashes that others might find challenging to replicate with makeup. Her nose was not prominent, slightly small, but she had an appealing mouth. While her individual features might not stand out, they blended together into an appealing whole. He Ching-en scrutinized her for a while before realizing he forgot to press the elevator button. 3. Once inside, He Ching-en untied the tie around Eun-hui's neck, leaving a few faint red marks. He Ching-en, look at that big villain. He hit me. Where did he hit you? He touched my leg. Eun-hui, in the midst of speaking, started to cry, looking extremely aggrieved. He Ching-en chuckled instead of getting angry. There. I've avenged you. Did you also touch him? No. He Ching-en, you can only touch me. All right, I didn't touch him, just hit him, He Ching-en coaxed Eun-hui as if comforting a child. Similarly, Eun-hui clung to He Ching-en like a child. Eun, be good, sit on the sofa. I need to change my clothes, He Ching-en called Eun-hui just as he used to, but in reality, it had been a long time since he addressed her this way. Previously, he and Eun-hui were like two raging lions, the closest of people, yet they acted like enemies who never interacted. Eun-hui never backed down or softened, and neither did he. So, in this moment, with the unguarded, drunken Eun-hui, He Ching-en found her incredibly adorable. He let down all his defenses and involuntarily became gentle. I'll help you change. Haven't I always done it for you? You're tired today, you need to rest. Go rest now. I'm not tired, He Ching-en, I'm not tired. Eun-hui insisted as she attempted to undress He Ching-en. In the summer clothes, she managed to remove one layer after another. Playfully poking He Ching-en's chest, she giggled, your body is still in great shape. He Ching-en took Eun-hui's hand off. Okay, be good. I'll do it myself. No. Just as Eun-hui said this, her hand reached towards He Ching-en's lower body. The familiar scent lingered around him, and he had already reacted intensely. As Eun-hui undressed him, even reaching to touch a certain area, He Ching-en exclaimed her name loudly, Eun. Eun-hui raised her head, looking innocent. He Ching-en could only helplessly explain, this part doesn't need to come off. Huh, He Ching-en, are you shy? I've seen it before, so long, still the same length. Eun-hui gestured, losing her balance and falling onto He Ching-en. Eun-hui slowly lifted her head, as if about to kiss him, but He Ching-en pushed her away. Eun, you can't. I'm going to take a shower. Why? Because we're already divorced. 4. Drunk Eun-hui couldn't care less about such matters. Faced with Eun-hui, He Ching-en's self-control was almost non-existent. So, when He Ching-en's phone rang the next day, Eun-hui was peacefully sleeping in his arms. He silenced the phone, replied with a text, "I'll come later," and switched it to silent mode, placing it by the bedside. He continued to hold on to Huey's slender waist. When did she cut her hair and dye it? Her previous black hair reached down her waist. How could she bear to cut it? This was their first meeting after 3 months of divorce, and unexpectedly, it ended up in bed. Though only 3 months had passed, time had made Hee Ching-in forget why they initially decided to divorce. He only remembered each tense moment but couldn't recall the initial spark. He still clearly loved Hui, both before and now. Thinking about this, he leaned in to kiss her again, but before he could, Hui's phone rang. Sensitive to her own ringtone, Hui suddenly opened her eyes and saw Hee Ching-in's enlarged face. Her first thought was that she was dreaming. She blinked, turned her body, and reached for her phone. Hui. What time is it? Why haven't you come to the office? The boss's voice immediately brought Hui to full alertness. After hanging up the phone, Hui sat up abruptly, giving Hee Ching-in a fierce look. However, she suddenly realized she was naked, hastily grabbed a thin blanket, but as she pulled it, Hee Ching-in ended up exposing half of his body. Hee Ching-in leisurely stood up, walked to the wardrobe to change his clothes, acting as if it was perfectly normal. "It's not like you haven't seen it before." Hee Ching-in chuckled when he said this, recognizing it as something Hui had mentioned the night before. Sitting on the bed, Hui looked frustrated. Some fragments of the previous night's events were still in her memory. How did she end up drinking again? And why was it Hee Ching-in who appeared? Who asked you to meddle in my affairs? Don't forget, you're my ex-husband. Hee Ching-in casually fastened the last button and then strolled over to Hui's side. He took her phone, not far from her, opened the contacts, and indeed, Hee Ching-in was saved as husband. Hee Ching-in held the phone in front of Hui. How do you explain this? I certainly hope you don't make me meddle in your business. Hee Ching-in had an arrogant expression. I just didn't have time to change it. Oh. 3 months and still no time. How much time is enough? A year, a lifetime? Hee Ching-in smiled smugly. Hui was so angry that she clenched the blanket tightly, unable to utter a word, turning her face away, unwilling to look at him. After Hee Ching-in left, Hui finally bent down to pick up the clothes scattered on the floor. Surprisingly, it was the same outfit she wore to the hotel last night. The dress was so short, how was she supposed to go to work like this? Just as she was frowning in distress, Hee Ching-in came in again and tossed a set of clothes to her, saying, "Nana's, left it here the last time she visited." Nana was Hee Ching-in's cousin, whom Hui had met a few times. Hui picked up the clothes and asked, "Does she know?" "Not yet. When she visited, I stayed at the company's dorms. But she'll find out sooner or later." Hui replied in a low tone, "Oh." She thought, sooner or later to find out, yes, her family, his family, would eventually learn about the established fact of their divorce. 5. Hui didn't let Hee Ching-in accompany her, opting to take the subway by herself. Last night was too intense, and Hui's body still felt a bit uncomfortable. Moreover, it seemed like people on the street kept looking her way. Nana's clothes fit her perfectly, it shouldn't be that they were staring at her. Maybe she was just being overly sensitive. In a daze, Hui reached the office. It was already past 10 o'clock. Just as she sat down in the office, she received a text from a colleague, "Hui, go change your clothes quickly." Hui was surprised, was it really about the clothes? She quickly replied, "Are they ill-fitting?" "No, it's about the love marks," came the reply from her colleague, specifically using exclamation marks. Upon reading those words, Hui's face instantly turned red, blood rushing through her body. After a few seconds of processing, she hurriedly headed to the clothing store downstairs. She knew her boss, that old woman, detested messy private lives. Hui arrived at the clothing store and, upon seeing the glaring love marks on her neck, couldn't help but burst out in a curse, "Damn it. Damn you, Hee Ching-in, you're ruthless enough. All those people she met today must have seen it, right? It was simply too embarrassing. She picked a high-necked outfit, changed into it, and just as she arrived at the office, her boss happened to be looking for her. She pouted, knowing she was in for a scolding, but compared to reuniting with He Ching-in, it was trivial. Not seeing He Ching-in for so long, he seemed even more handsome. It was nothing like what romance novels depicted, falling apart after parting ways. Was it because he truly didn't love her that much? And Hui still remembered the day they divorced. They stood there silently, no one saying a word. When they left the Civil Affairs Bureau, she impulsively said as if in a fit of pique, "Never see you again." Then they went their separate ways, one to the left, the other to the right. A single road, indeed, kept them from meeting again. Yet, in that moment of turning away, and Huey's heart twinged. She deliberately ignored it, pretending to herself that she was free. 6. He Ching-in and Hui met at a small gathering hosted by a friend. They were grouped together for a game, and thus, they got to know each other. He Ching-in thought Hui was nice, and Hui thought the same about He Ching-in. They almost simultaneously inquired with their common friends if the other had a significant other. With a smirk, their friend didn't expect to inadvertently play matchmaker, considering both Hui and He Ching-in were known for their picky tastes. Hui was outgoing, and their relationship didn't involve much secrecy. So, not long after they met, they quickly confirmed their relationship. Perhaps real love is simple and straightforward. Those laden with hesitation and concern must have something else mixed into the love. The two passionately dated and passionately got married. When Hui thought she could surely manage this marriage well, there was already a subtle crack between them. He Ching-in and Hui were both only children, pampered since childhood and possessing strong personalities. When the romantic courtship turned into the realities of daily life, the disparity in Hui's heart was enormous. Married life was nothing like those lovingly depicted in comics, with cuddling every night, brushing teeth together, and cooking together. While initially even sleep could be sweet, gradually, He Ching-in felt annoyed when Hui laid on his arm for too long, making his hand numb. Hui, on the other hand, didn't like a warm body pressing against her. She missed the freedom of turning over and kicking the blanket. Sleeping was just a trivial matter among many issues, and there were also lifestyle habits and various hidden personalities to adapt to. Thus, even household chores could lead to arguments. What truly escalated the conflicts was the matter of getting insurance for both sets of parents. He Ching-in, why does your father get this type of insurance, and my father gets that type? Of course, your father suits this one. Suits. These two differ by 1,000 yuan. It's not about the money, look at the coverage. At the beginning, He Ching-in tried to explain things to Hui in a friendly manner, but later, he found her unreasonable and lost his temper. The argument escalated from insurance matters to lifestyle habits and then to questioning each other's love. However, before the couple could resolve their fights at one end of the bed, a new problem arose. When He Ching-in was confiding in his childhood friend, Hui happened to see them. The topic was normal, but the private nature of their meeting seemed ambiguous. He Ching-in, so you still have a confidant? No, don't think too much about it. After nearly 2 months of quarrels and silent battles, Hui suddenly started to lose faith in marriage. She couldn't understand why everything changed after marrying He Ching-in, despite their strong bond during their courtship. Hui made a vivid metaphor: love is like coffee. After marriage, it must go from white to black, from sweet to bitter, and from hot to cold. So, one early morning, she pushed open the door to the guest room and, facing the just-awakened He Ching-in, calmly said, "Let's get a divorce." As Hui uttered the last syllable, their marriage, not even a year old, came to an end. When He Ching-in heard those words, he was surprised that he didn't feel heartbroken. Instead, he felt relief. Indeed, the 11 months of marriage were not what he had envisioned. They had unresolved issues that kept bothering them. He Ching-in didn't know how to handle the myriad of problems or pinpoint the exact cause of their issues with Hui. In that moment, he just wanted to escape. So, he calmly responded, "Okay. They stared at each other, like a common scene at the end of a movie, marking the conclusion of an imperfect ending. After the divorce, Hui did not fare well. She always felt a sense of emptiness in her heart. However, being as proud as she would never do anything to turn back. For the past 3 months, she had been enduring the urge to contact He Ching-in, and He Ching-in had indeed not reached out to her either. Often, she would stare blankly at the husband entry in her contacts, the very word reminding her that she had once been married. Marriage, that murky water, she had waded through it. She contemplated altering a famous saying. Now, she believed that what makes a person grow is not suffering but marriage. And Hui, Zhou Jia wants you in the office. Her colleague's sudden voice interrupted Hui's thoughts. She quickly snapped back to reality, straightened her clothes, and headed to her supervisor's office. And Hui, the company has just taken on a new case. I recommended you to Mr. Wang. You'll be going with him to negotiate. Sure, I can do that. And Hui responded readily. However, when her supervisor handed her the documents, Hui felt an urge to cut off her own tongue. Clearly written on the document was the name, Gavin, which was He Ching-in's company. Zhou Jia, I suddenly remembered, I might have something next week. And Hui began to make excuses, but for some reason, she felt her tongue tying up in knots. Stumbling through her words, she failed to evoke any patience from Zhou Jia, who seemed entirely confident in her. In the next moment, Hui truly wanted to confess. She didn't want to go to her ex-husband's company because it would be awkward. When she and He Ching-in had just gotten married, their two companies were in talks for collaboration. However, despite the successful cooperation between the two companies, she and He Ching-in ended their marriage. Fortunately, this case wouldn't involve direct interaction with He Ching-in's department. Given the size of the company, she shouldn't run into He Ching-in. More than half a month passed, and as the project approached its conclusion, due to Hui's mistake, the entire project's progress was forced to slow down. That day, at a corner of He Ching-in's company, she was scolded harshly by Mr. Wang. Hui was no longer a newcomer to the workplace, but being scolded by Mr. Wang was still hard for her to accept. With tears in her eyes, Hui lowered her head in silence. After enduring Mr. Wang's scolding, she happened to see He Ching-in standing in front of her when she looked up. He Ching-in, as before, paid attention to his appearance. There wasn't a wrinkle to be found on his clothes. As Hui looked at him, neatly groomed, she felt a sense of unfamiliarity. He could never be the one to embrace her again. Hui forcefully wiped her eyes, eliminating the few tears that were left. She turned away without intending to exchange any greetings with He Ching-in, but he reached out and grabbed her arm. What are you doing? Hui's tone wasn't good, and her voice carried a hint of hoarseness. He Ching-in stood opposite Hui, furrowing his brow. What's wrong? Why did he scold you? What was originally meant to be a caring question sounded cold and indifferent coming from He Ching-in. Is it any of your business? Hui, is it necessary for you to keep me at arm's length? You weren't like this when you were drunk. You were much cuter when you were drunk. He Ching-in, back when we got married, you weren't as concerned about me. Do you know what's superfluous? Summer's padded jackets, winter's feather fans, and your attentiveness when my heart turns cold. He Ching-in stared at Hui, unsure of what to say. He knew her temperament very well. Most of the time, she liked to say one thing and mean another. This time, he didn't want to argue with her. Instead, he put his arm around her shoulder and said deeply, "Let's go, I'll take you to have some cream puffs." Upon hearing this, Hui momentarily forgot to resist because she didn't expect him to remember everything about her, especially that she craved cream puffs when she was sad. She remembered the time they were dating when she was scolded by her boss one day. She called him, complaining about her grievances, and not long after hanging up, he appeared at her doorstep with a box of cream puffs. She had been cared for and cherished by him once. She said, once. No need, I'm still busy with work, and I don't need to eat that kind of thing now. Hui said, not waiting for He Ching-in's response, and walked away with brisk strides. Her high heels made crisp sounds on the floor. He Ching-in watched her leave and didn't follow. He admitted that he still cared about her, just like before, but the complex thoughts in his mind were too difficult to untangle. The next day, there was a turning point in the project. And Hui found it unbelievable, thinking it was probably a resource arranged by Mr. Wang. However, Mr. Wang, instead of getting the resources, found An Hui first. You did well. That's how bosses are. If you do something wrong, they'll talk about it extensively, but if you perform well, you only get a simple praise. That. I still have a meeting. Mr. Wang raised the files in his hand, left without letting An Hui finish, leaving An Hui alone in place wondering who helped her. Could it be He Ching-in? But why would he help her? Out of sympathy? An Hui shook her head, feeling that thinking about these questions was really annoying, like an endless abyss, one question leading to another without any answers. At this moment, An Hui's phone rang. It was her mother, saying that her father's old ailment had recurred. So An Hui skipped the celebration banquet and went directly to the hospital. The atmosphere in the ward was not tense because An Hui's father's old ailment could be treated with a few intravenous drips and wouldn't be life-threatening. What was more troublesome was that each treatment couldn't address the root cause. In the ward, An Hui's mother asked about He Ching-in. An Hui quickly responded, he's on a business trip, he'll be back in a few days. Oh, tell Ching-in not to overwork. Young people like you often neglect your health. An Hui nodded lightly, the truth on the tip of her tongue, but no matter what, she couldn't say it. The part of An Hui's father's medical expenses that she paid out of pocket was not much. When He Ching-in chose insurance at that time, he also considered An Hui's father's condition and included this provision in the insurance. An Hui handed over the money and smiled helplessly. She really didn't know why she was so angry at that time, why she couldn't even listen to He Ching-in's explanation. Was she really, as He Ching-in said, being quite unreasonable? Mom, how have you and Dad managed to walk together for so many years? On foot, of course. Mom. In fact, it's about adapting and being tolerant. The beginning of marriage is fresh and sweet, but gradually it becomes plain and repetitive. When your father and I were young, we used to argue every day, but as we got older, we stopped arguing. Mom now realizes that understanding and respect are crucial in marriage. Don't assume that the other person should naturally understand and care for you. Shall we? Why are you suddenly asking this question? Is it about you and Ching-in? Oh, we're still in our honeymoon phase, everything's great. Just asking casually, An Hui said, linking arms with her mother and looking playful. In her mind, what her mother repeatedly mentioned was the importance of understanding and respect in marriage. Did people close to each other really need respect? On the fifth day, after work, He Ching-in drove to a supermarket in the city center. Anne's mother also came to the supermarket to buy some daily necessities, and the two unexpectedly met. Ching-in, you're back from your business trip? He Ching-in frowned for a moment, then realized that it might be a lie that An Hui made up. He nodded to Anne's mother, yes, just got off the plane. Mom, what are you doing here? After speaking, He Ching-in glanced at the basket in Anne's mother's hand, which had towels and other items. Anne's parents lived in the suburbs and would not come to the city center supermarket to buy daily necessities. Could it be? Did Dad get sick again? Anne's mother nodded, he's better now. We can leave the hospital the day after tomorrow. He Ching-in was surprised. He didn't expect Anne's father to have been in the hospital for so long, and An Hui hadn't mentioned a word. She just said he was on a business trip. When He Ching-in accompanied Anne's mother to the hospital room, An Hui was peeling apples for her father. Seeing He Ching-in come in, the hand holding the apple couldn't help but tighten. This was the first time they appeared in front of her parents together since their divorce. However, He Ching-in looked completely natural, chatting with Anne's father and mother as usual. After hearing that everything was fine, He Ching-in felt relieved. That night, He Ching-in insisted on staying. He asked An Hui and her mother to go home and rest. An Hui was afraid of exposing anything and didn't dare to refuse too vehemently. In the end, she had to reluctantly agree. Various procedures for leaving the hospital were handled entirely by Hee Ching-in. He even took time off to personally escort Hui's parents home. Anne's mother looked satisfied with her son-in-law. And Hui admitted that Hee Ching-in was indeed a filial person, whether to his own parents or hers. From dating to marriage, he had always been consistent. However, regarding the insurance incident, she had spoken such hurtful words to him. After dropping her parents off, there were only Hee Ching-in and Hui in the car. The extremely low air pressure made Hui uncomfortable all over. She awkwardly said, "Thank you," as if trying to find something to say. No response. So they remained silent all the way home. After Hee Ching-in dropped Hui off at her house, he showed no intention of leaving and even got out of the car. "Aren't you going back?" Hui asked. "I left something here. It's convenient to take it back now." Hui took 3 seconds to react to this statement. Although she couldn't remember what he left here, she couldn't find fault with the words. She nodded and let him into the house. The room was still arranged as it used to be, not very spacious, but each piece of furniture was perfectly placed. In the entrance, Hui kept Hee Ching-in's slippers, or more precisely, she kept many of his belongings. There was a time when she had clearly tidied everything up and thrown it into the trash, but after more than half an hour of inner struggle, she inexplicably went to the trash can and retrieved them. She comforted herself by saying she would throw away Hee Ching-in's things when she found the next one. In reality, she had no intention of accepting the next person. Hui tossed the slippers to Hee Ching-in and said, "Find them yourself." Then she turned to the bedroom to change clothes. Unexpectedly, Hee Ching-in followed her in. Hui pulled down the t-shirt halfway and stared at Hee Ching-in, as if asking how he entered. Hee Ching-in walked up to Hui, closing in step by step. "Why didn't you tell me about Dad being hospitalized?" "Why should I tell you?" Hui turned her face away. She didn't know why, but she didn't dare to look Hee Ching-in in the eye. Hee Ching-in was left speechless by her retort. Her eyes seemed extremely stubborn, and Hee Ching-in didn't know what he was angry about. The atmosphere froze again. Hui spoke, "Get out, I need to change." But Hee Ching-in not only didn't leave, but also pulled Hui into his arms. The next moment, a kiss rained down on her, and Hee Ching-in controlled Hui's movements, rendering her unable to resist. Finally getting a moment to speak, Hui angrily said, "This is rape. You can go ahead and report it." 10. After everything was done, Hee Ching-in carried Hui to take a shower. Hui's tears dropped into the bathtub with a patter. Furrowing his brows, Hee Ching-in asked, "Why are you crying?" Hui remained silent. Hee Ching-in reached out to gently wipe away her tears, then asked earnestly, "Did I hurt you?" Hui continued crying, showing no response. It wasn't until Hee Ching-in said, "I promise to be gentle next time," that Hui lifted her head, glared at Hee Ching-in in anger, but Hee Ching-in was in a good mood as he embraced Hui. Hui didn't know why she was crying. She just felt that falling in love with this man made her particularly aggrieved. From top to bottom, from left to right, she felt extremely wronged all over. Her future with Hee Ching-in left her feeling utterly confused. So when Hee Ching-in said, "Let's stop fighting and get back together," she shuddered. She was more afraid than anyone else that they would repeat the same mistakes. "Hee Ching-in, I love you, but I don't have the confidence to spend my life with you, do you know?" Hui cried even harder in Hee Ching-in's arms. Exhausted from crying, she fell into a deep sleep, while Hee Ching-in stayed awake all night. Her answer terrified him. He was afraid that despite their love, they wouldn't be able to stay together. However, Hui, I don't want to let go at all, even if we torment each other. When Hui woke up the next day, Hee Ching-in was already gone. She placed her hand on the now cooled bedsheets, feeling a bit lost. She remembered every word of their conversation last night. Hee Ching-in told her he chose divorce simply to escape, but what about herself? Perhaps, divorcing was just her way of being defiant. Marriage, such a serious matter, had turned their lives into a child's play. And that evening, while Hui was having dinner at the table, He Ching-en walked in, accompanied by his luggage. And Hui stood up abruptly, puzzled by He Ching-en's actions. Was he planning to leave and say goodbye to her? And Hui was startled by her own thoughts. And then, let's live together. Huh? He Ching-en looked serious, without a hint of joking. You said you lacked the courage, let me accompany you to find it. I don't believe we can't be together. 11. And Hui and He Ching-en's cohabitation began. He Ching-en, is it illegal for ex-husbands and ex-wives to live together? He Ching-en smirked, what are you thinking? Let the police take you away first. Do you have the heart for that? He Ching-en hugged An Hui from behind, whispered tenderly in her ear. For a moment, An Hui forgot about stirring the food in the pot, letting them make a sizzling sound. Just when An Hui thought He Ching-en was about to make a move, he released his grip, stood beside her, and appraised her. I didn't expect you to become such a virtuous wife and mother. Hey, I was always good. An Hui said loudly, but felt a bit guilty inside. She indeed didn't use to cook before, but later, for some reason, she started entering the kitchen. She even began enjoying baking pastries and arranging them on plates in attractive shapes. She gradually realized that real life was hidden in each meal. Hey, come help me. An Hui shouted at He Ching-en, asking him to assist in the kitchen. However, He Ching-en cheekily reached for An Hui's buttocks, saying, oh? Is it from here? Their lifestyle hadn't changed at all, they still quarreled and bickered, refusing to give in to each other. This was the inevitable result of two strong-willed individuals being together. However, An Hui could clearly feel a shift in her mentality. She was no longer as impulsive as before, but rather more sensible, understanding, and less inclined to complain. He Ching-en also developed a new understanding of love through their day-to-day interactions. Love wasn't just about sharing, it also involved sharing responsibilities. And Huey's birthday was approaching, and He Ching-en intentionally bought wine to celebrate, along with balloons and flowers. He put in as much effort as he did during their initial courtship. Could marriage be managed to keep it fresh and exciting? When An Hui returned home, she was too excited to speak. There was no woman who didn't appreciate romance. He Ching-en personally cooked the meal. As he poured wine for An Hui, she declined. It's fine, getting drunk is no big deal. There's no one else here. You look cute when you're drunk. You're never cute, An Hui picked up her wine glass and twirled it. But that's not the point. The point is, Mr. He, you're going to be a dad. 12. After dinner, the two cuddled by the window. An Hui questioned He Ching-en, tell me, was getting pregnant your secret plan? It's not a secret plan, it's more like going with the flow. I knew it, He Ching-en. And then, let's register our marriage tomorrow, okay? Can you help me register mine too? Going alone feels embarrassing. Do you think they'll recognize us? He Ching-en followed An Hui's words with a suggestion, then how about we ask someone to register for us? An Hui burst into laughter, saying, I don't care, I won't go anyway. It's all your fault for not trying to stop me when you divorced me. Okay, it's all my fault. Tomorrow, I'll find a woman to go with me. No. The couple continued to banter, their voices mingling under the moonlight, harmonizing with the city lights. It turns out that the scenery doesn't fade on its own, it's our eyes that become clouded. Love is, in fact, so simple, not complicated at all.